Good afternoon. My name is David Fries, and this is the BESA Webinar. We're out of lockdown-ish, sort of, and I do hope that some of you at least are in the pub car park or in the pub, whatever, drinking while you're watching this webinar. Me, still not out yet, and I definitely need a haircut. I'm very, very much looking like Doc Brown at the moment, but I go on Friday, which is a key thing. We've been saying for some time that we have been making membership of BESA more difficult, more robust, technical audit in particular, focusing on can you do the job? It's probably a given that you're properly insured, that you've got complaints procedures, but can you actually strangle pipework into a plant room? And therefore some congratulations are due to the following companies: Hestia Mechanical Building Services, Air Conditioning Products, Buckley Plumbing and Mechanical Services, Industrial Engineering Plastics, Alpha Plus and SPE, who've passed their audits for BESA membership. You have to requalify. It's not a given that you can become a BESA member. So congratulations to all of those companies. We're trying to raise the bar on technical competence. So today is all about attracting and retaining the right people. How do you do that? And our first guest today is Neil Carberry, who's Chief Executive of the REC, the Recruitment Employment Confederation. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you, David. Pleasure to be here.
An impressively white shirt ironed, I must say, not really Zoom casual.
Well, it depends. I am kind of shorts from the waist down, so I've gone for contrast more than mixing it through the offer today.
Splendid, right. So you're going to come on first, and then we've got Richard Snarey from PRS Recruitment, then Helen Yeulet, who's our Director of Training and Skills. So over to you. I'll join you at the end for the Q&A.
Well, thank you, David, and good afternoon, everyone. Real pleasure to be able to join you. For those of you who don't know the REC is BESA for recruiters. We are the trade and professional body for the British recruitment and staffing industry. We've got 3,300 company members and 10,000 individual members. And as David was just describing for BESA, we have a qualifying test for members to join us as well that people have to renew. And the thing that's on my mind most is I've got to get 1,000 of the members through the test before the deadline on June the 30th. That's my big Q2 challenge inside the REC. What David and team asked me to do is come and talk a little bit about the labour market, setting the context of this discussion about hiring the right people for the next stage of your journey in terms of getting the right skills in place. So what I've got here is some REC data, some observations that come from the fact that recruiters are at the heart of the labour market, those transitions that people are making, but also my own reflections. I've been a member of the Low Pay Commission that sets the minimum wage for the last 7 years. I sit on the Council of ACAS, so I have quite a lot to do with how things are changing in the British labour market. So a bit of a whirlwind tour for you of where I think we are on labour supply in Britain right now. Next slide, please. I'm afraid it's going to be Chris Whitty central, this presentation and the others today, so I shall make sure I try and do an impersonation of the great man as I go. So the first and most important trend to draw out is generally when you talk to businesses about the economy right now, they are quite downbeat. When you talk to businesses about their own businesses right now, they are quite upbeat. And you can see that in our hiring and investment decisions measure from our regular jobs outlook survey. This is a survey of employing businesses, not of recruiters. And you can see here that while the outlook for the wider economy, that's the dark blue line on these slides, is still quite low. People think, many businesses think the economy is still getting worse in February. That was the middle of the lockdown. We know it wasn't getting worse because we had the GDP figures this morning. Actually, if you ask them about their own business, look at that teal line. We've had a substantial and sustained recovery in people's outlook for their own business over the last few months, and it has persisted through the lockdown we're just coming out of now. This has been, when you get to the micro level, the experience of many businesses that things are actually quite good and people are more willing to hire than certainly they were when we had the big fall in demand back in last March and April. Next slide, please. So if you look at actual experience, and our report on jobs measures what recruiters bill month to month, so it gives us a really clear sense of whether things are going up and down. No prizes for guessing where on the chart on the bottom left of the slide the March and April last year is, a very significant fall, similar to the one we saw around the Great Financial Crisis, but shorter and deeper. The story of the last 6 months in the labour market has been employers being able to see demand, but then increasingly as they, excuse the background noise, by the way, it's a law that when I go on a webinar, the localised cream van comes around, so it'll appear rather closer in about 2 minutes' time. As we've come out of that period of March, April, May last year, what we've seen is employers able to see demand and wanting to meet that demand, but lacking the confidence because of that dark blue line we saw on the previous slide to hire permanently. So here at the tail end of that graph on the bottom left hand side, you can see the effects of that, which is that the tail line on this graph is the temporary billings, and we've seen a really big and positive 6 months for people bringing in temporary staff. Permanent staff, permanent hiring has been much weaker until last week, until March. And we're definitely seeing that starting to pick up again now. So again, that story of hiring beginning to take off again, not only in the sentiment data that we're getting for employers, but in the actual real numbers that REC members are billing, definitely there. And related to that, bottom right-hand side, you can see staff availability. Obviously peaked as people fell out of work last spring, has come right back down now. We've completed the cycle. Staff availability is now dropping again as sites open up. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So just to show that in the subsectors that are most relevant to BESA members, exactly the same story here. Engineering, a bit less of the led by temp and recovering in perm later. Actually, temp and perm roughly in lockstep and recovering earlier. Construction, the other way around, backlit with the main story. Construction, very much temp first and then perm. But as you can see, the same story in the subsectors that BESA members will be most concerned by. Next slide, please. And just to emphasize that, we talk about unemployment. There were 1.2 million active job adverts in late March. That is returning to just about the level that we would see normally. And as you can see in the areas where we've got growth, not building engineering necessarily there yet, but certainly construction leading the way in rises in new jobs postings, and the ones that are still falling were the ones you'd expect. This is data from March. We're talking about the jobs that were still fully closed in March and are only beginning to open up now. So a real sense that the labour market is a lot more robust than we might have expected it to be at this stage. Next slide, please. So let's put that together with the overall economic picture. The big trend for the last 3 months across all of the developed nations, the whole G7, has been outperforming expectations on growth. That has been particularly true in the UK. We saw the GDP figures for February this morning, I mentioned earlier, which showed growth of 0.4%, despite the fact we were in a full lockdown. So the economy has changed shape to adapt to lockdowns and to the challenges, but it's a bit more positive because people expect with the vaccination program that this last 3 months was the last full lockdown we're likely to see. So we are expecting to see a really strong recovery in the UK through the rest of the year, driven by two things. Firstly, confidence. John Maynard Keynes was right. You know, the economy is fundamentally organic. It's driven by animal spirits. We have all been restraining spending for over a year. Human beings don't like doing that. a bit of uptick. David was talking about pub gardens earlier. There is a reason for that. People want to get out and spend a bit of money, have a good time. It's been a miserable year for everyone. There's going to be some energy there. And of course, what's really important is lots of companies and lots of households, not every household by every mean, but a percentage of households are sitting on a lot of cash that they've reserved, either because they pulled their horns in to navigate the crisis, or because they haven't had commuting costs and other things like that over the last year. We would expect that to flow into the economy quicker than maybe government and the bank have thought so far. Interesting to see this morning that McKinsey are suggesting that will be the case. All of that says that the bank's expectation that unemployment will peak at 6.5% is, if anything, a little bit pessimistic. Now, take a step back from that. We've had the biggest recession in 200 years, and unemployment will peak several percentage points lower than it did in and after the Great Financial Crisis. At the same time, though, we're having massive levels of economic change, new businesses growing, some businesses changing fundamentally. So what we are facing here in the labour market is actually not a job creation challenge, it's a job transition challenge in an environment where unemployment will not be high and candidate availability will not be hugely up on where we've seen it for the last few years. Next slide, please. So there's three broadly longer term issues that you should think about when thinking about long-term staffing. Firstly, some of the changes that we are seeing in the labour market are secular and not cyclical. High street retail will never employ the number of people it did before the crisis, but it was already dropping before the crisis hit. That is what creates the difficult transition. So we have to find pathways to get people from what they're doing now into industries that are growing. And that means that companies need to be thinking about that mix, that triangle between what do we buy, what do we go out and hire, what do we borrow, what do we take on temporarily from a staffing firm, from an REC member or elsewhere, and what do we grow ourselves? How do we invest in apprenticeships and other forms of training to either to grow young people in early career or to pull people across from jobs they've been doing in other sectors that are experiencing a secular rather than a cyclical dip. Second point is that Brexit dynamics and demographics will feed labour market tightness. Now, we've talked quite a bit about the effect of the loss of free movement on the labour market as a whole in the UK for the last few years, and I think that will cause some tightness. I actually think demographics is as big an issue, and I'll go on in a second to show you why that is. And then I think it's important to acknowledge that one of the reasons unemployment is going to peak low is that government intervention, the furlough scheme, was enormous through the last year. And therefore, because of that, and the fact that government has some very clear views about how things should be done and think about levelling up, or thinking about some of the media and public square pressure around inclusion in industries, those things are not going to go away. So I think you do good recruitment for a number of reasons. One is you're going to have to widen your pool. Secondly, that pool will require your employer brand to be one that people want to associate with. And I think that piece around doing things well and having a longer term plan that then enables you thirdly to adapt as the market changes around you is why I say to companies across the country, you all tell me that people are your greatest asset. Why do you bring them on board like you buy paper clips? This has got to be front and center in your planning, workforce planning. Don't have to use a recruiter to advise you, but they're great advisors. But there's definitely got to be more space for that workforce planning agenda and that triangle of grow, buy, borrow in your thinking going forward. Next slide, please. So I said I'd show you a bit of data that explains why I think demographics is actually bigger than immigration as a driver of tightness. And I think this is particularly true if you look at your own workforce now, and if your workforce is, in the 50s, what you're looking at is the number of young people who are entering the labour market at any one point. So that peak at just below 3 is in 1963. So there are people who entered the labour market in about 1980. And they are people who you would legitimately expect to be beginning to exit now. That number is 50% higher than any point since 1979. And what that means is our domestic-born labour force over the next decade, possibly more than a decade, is going to get smaller. That is going to be another challenge, that the sheer stock of skilled people in mid-career will not be as high as we have been used to for the last few years. I think it's really important to appreciate that as a big macro trend in the British labour market. Next slide, please. So just to conclude, to draw it all together and to hand over to Helen. Staffing issues are going to be more complex. We're going to have more unprecedented challenges than before. That kind of simple process that maybe you've run for years is not going to work as effectively. While you might not have relied on EU nationals, other firms were, and they no longer have access to them, so they're fishing in the same pool as you. While you might not have been aware of the demographic structure, that's going to tighten the pool further. So every firm in recruitment is talking about employer brand, about employer the offer you want to make, but also making sure you get recruitment right in terms of finding the right pools. You know, looking at different ways of bringing people on board and bearing in mind that really important triangle of the 3 ways you can source people into your business and having a real workforce plan. And I think it is a pressing challenge because the mid to late 2020 story of the UK economy is going to be strong growth driven by businesses adapting fast, and I think a really tight labour market really quite quickly. I was having a discussion with some of the big civils just yesterday about infrastructure build, and we are not far away from a real challenge in terms of being able to do HS2 and the roads programme and everything else that we need to do in that sphere. Final slide, please. Have the next slide, please. And just if you're interested in kind of this good recruitment message and what you can do have a look at our website, rec.uk.com/recruitment and recovery for some of the stories about what good recruitment can and does deliver in terms of productivity and growth. And if you're interested in doing things the right way, think about signing up for the REC's Good Recruitment Collective, which is a group of employers who are committed to doing things the right way, and we support with some best practice advice and guidance. And very happy to have a chat about all of this when we get to the Q&A session, but delighted also to have had the chance to talk to you today. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Helen, who hopefully will appear. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Neil. Thanks very much for that. That really set me up with some of those nice statistics on the need for upskilling your workforce. So today, what I'm going to talk about is some of the reports that are out there in terms of what you actually need to think about from a skilling your workforce, both current and those that you're looking to recruit, to get yourselves as a business ready for this next chapter from post-COVID. So Charlie, can we just move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. So looking at some of the reports, this one from McKinsey that I've got here on the left-hand side, that was actually done in 2017, and it was talking about what the requirements were by 2020. Well, that was well before we understood there was a pandemic, and there was already a need for us to look at how do we reskill our current workforce and how do we upskill the workforce. Now, these studies were done, all of the statistics I'm going to talk about were done across both America and Europe as a whole. So a really good base of businesses that were interviewed. To back that up, the LinkedIn have done a workplace learning report this year, and they show that actually there's a definite sign of a reduction in business growth if we don't do something about closing these skills gaps in the next 3 to 5 years. That's really scary because we knew we already had a skill gap before we hit the COVID pandemic. And we've really got to start to look at how we address this. Those businesses that are in the best position to be able to move forward are probably those ones that are already have a plan in place, very much as Neil was talking about, making sure that you are investing in your people today, not treating them as paper clips, and making sure that you've got a plan to reskill them as things change and your business moves on. Have the next slide, please, John. Sorry. Thank you. So what skills do we actually need? Well, there have been lots of reports done out there, and to be honest, they're all coming out with the same themes. Digital is probably not going to be a surprise to you. Now, a lot of people will also say, I'm in building services, my guys work on site, they probably don't need digital skills. I would disagree. I think every single worker that you have in whatever occupation they're in are going to need some element of digital expertise, whether that's how to use their phone to communicate with you through WhatsApp, which is what everybody does, or whether it's something more around some of the new apps that are coming out there, some of the training methods that we've certainly started to adopt and push out there. Digital is going to be an absolute requirement. If it isn't now, you need to make sure your workers are ahead of that curve now. The next one is cognitive, and this one is really about making sure that your individuals are actually more flexible, that they have an idea around creative problem solving. How can they deal with these things, and how do you actually upskill them onto that? I'll come on to that one in a minute. Because the other thing that the workplace learning from LinkedIn also backs this up, because they, having interviewed the executives across America and the EU, they say that 42% of learning requirements are around creative problem solving and design requirements. So individuals being able to undertake that. They're looking at that as an area for them to drive their upskilling over the next few years. With social and emotional learning, that's about communication. We all need to communicate, but by God, have we all had to learn how to communicate differently over the last 12 months. And that's not going to change. I think whilst we are going to continue to enjoy being able to have face-to-face communication again, we're going to continue to actually use all the digital elements that we've suddenly found. My parents are suddenly on Zoom. I think everybody else is finding that older generation are doing things that they didn't think they would ever have to do. But actually, they're finding it's not that bad. And I think that how we actually take advantage of those different ways of engaging is important. But also, I think there's the other area, the issue that we need to be very conscious of is around mental health. Particularly as we come out of COVID, and I think we need to make sure that we upskill our leaders and our managers to be able to manage that and spot where there are issues. That whole emotional understanding and connection, and it's no longer good enough to be able to say to your workforce at any point, at any stage, no matter how old they are, that actually it's okay, just crack on, you'll be fine. We need to be very conscious about the impact that isolation has on people, or actually now, as Neil was saying, that when you go back into the workplace, what's the impact going to have? Because some people are going to find that quite difficult too. So we need to upskill our leaders and our managers in those areas too. The final one is resilience. And I think that's a really difficult one to teach, but it's actually about allowing people to make mistakes in a safe place. And we have obviously all become more resilient over the last year, but we need to and continue to see this as a skill that is required from our workforce, so that they can be resilient and adapt to the things that we need them to change to, literally on an old-fashioned saying of a sixpence, as we had to do this time last year. And the more you build all of these skills into your workforce, the more, regardless of what occupation they have, the more options you have as a business to be able to grow and move forward. Next slide, please. So where does that impact on your business? Well, you'd think that's all about just about the workplace and the individuals, but your individuals make up your business, your workplace. And before we came into this, and I love that graph that Neil showed earlier around the aging population, because we've always said we've got an aging workforce, and it's really interesting if you actually correlate that to the situation that we've got as a country. in that the baby boomers are obviously aging and becoming to retirement, and there aren't as many people coming into the workforce. We've got a smaller pool in which to fish. So as we're trying to attract people to come into us, you know, we've got to make ourselves attractive as a business. So how do we do that? We need to think about that. Everyone always says to me whenever I say, well, we need to bring new people in and we need to train them. And then in order to keep them, we need to train them and we need to make sure that they're comfortable and we reskill them and we give them all the skills that they need and we give them career pathways. And everyone says, we haven't got time for that. We just haven't got time for that. And I understand that. I know that all of you at the moment as businesses are just trying to deliver. You're here to make a profit. You're here to be productive. And during the last year, you've had to do that in such a different way. And you are going to continue to have to focus on the bottom line. Again, I absolutely understand that. However, if we don't do that, if we don't do something around the skilling, if we don't look at how we invest in this, if we don't actually look at investing in our people and look at apprenticeships, we're not going to have a workforce. We are not going to have a workforce that, as we said before, is resilient, has the capability of communicating and enabling your business to go forward. The more you skill people, the more profitable you will be as a business, because the more productive your workforce will be. That time and that cost is not something that you can ignore. Unfortunately, you do need to take a breather now, and now is the opportunity to do it. So let's look at those common skills that you both need as individuals, but also your business requires. You need to become more digital as an organization. You need to create and ensure that you've got the communication tools for your business to work. You need to make sure that all of that is being used by those people within that business. And you need to therefore have the resilience as a business to be able to adapt and change to what's going on. So I don't think that the skills that we're trying to teach the individuals are any different that you require as a business, and therefore to bring your apprentices in and to bring your new entrants in. This is an opportunity, I think, for us to really focus on upskilling and reskilling the workforce. Now I'm going to hand over to Richard. I hope you're there, Richard, who's going to show us how we can do this by a new jobs board for us.
Hi, hello everyone. Thank you very much. Very interesting, both panelists. This is the relatively short slide deck. You'll all be pleased to know by now. I'm very pleased to have been involved with BESA in the development of their new job board, which went live yesterday. My background is in mechanical and electrical engineering in the military, and for the last 20 years in mechanical electrical engineering recruitment. And so I've got a relatively in-depth knowledge of the industry and the recruitment sector. Most of the last 10 years I've spent working mainly in the technology and recruitment space. So a lot of my knowledge and a lot of my team's knowledge have gone into the development of this new job board. If we could move on to go through to the next slide, and I'll go through some of the benefits. First of all, everyone will love to know it's free. So it's free to post jobs. It's obviously free to candidates. It's going to be invested quite heavily in to get pay-per-click views on it. So this is a great opportunity to post your jobs, as many as you like, for free, which will all get syndicated out to the wider world. It's very simple to set up. There is a unique two-way chat between the applicant and the hiring manager on the job, and I think this is almost like I'm going to use the word a Tinderization of the communication channel between the client and the applicant, because quite a lot of cases we see that the breakdown in communications happens between the job application and the two-way comms normally goes on to email or phone calls, and this is a very simple two-way chat. We're going to be, as I've said, we're going to be spending quite a lot of funds, or BESA are going to be spending quite a lot of funds on generating interest and traffic onto the site. There is an ongoing support team, so there is a team of recruiters and marketeers available behind the site to help both candidates and clients. And there's going to be a lot more blogs and content coming over the next few months. We've got an expansion plan over the next few months to put a lot more on, including email alerts, dedicated client pages, and lots more advertising and lots more features. Next slide, please, in the deck. For job seekers, obviously free, very simple to set up. The two-way chat we've already discussed. There are over 3,000 syndicated jobs to the site, because what we've done is we're doing some job scraping from other job boards to make sure that relevant jobs to the industry are displayed in one place, kind of a one-stop shop. You've also got an ongoing team of professionals to support you, which is quite unusual at the end of a support ticket, which should be going live this week. Again, blogs around CV writing, online interviews, etc., and lots more features coming soon. So just the final slide, I think. An example of the board, very slick, very easy to navigate. Best practice in recruitment job boards and websites that we've taken and built from scratch, and we're really pleased that it's gone live relatively smoothly. Some changes happening during the week. We'd really like your feedback, so there is going to be a feedback form on the site soon, and we'd really like that. And of course, you've got Jenny's details at BESA who's got my hotline. So yeah, we're really pleased, and we're hoping that over the next few months we're going to build lots of value into the BESA members, BESA candidates, and the sector generally. So back to you guys for the Q&A, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That's great. So we'll just wait for the others to come back. Richard, you seem to have disappeared. You're coming back.
Here.
Hello, Neil. Hello, Helen. That's because you've hidden behind something else. So thank you all for great presentations. I'm going to start off with Neil, and you sort of touched on Brexit and immigration. What were the trends at the end of this? What's happened? Have people gone and not coming back, or where are we on that?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty clear that there has been quite a significant movement of people out of the United Kingdom. Of course, the whammy of the pandemic, which encouraged people to go home to their care structures wherever they were, and Brexit have led to that to happen. But I think I'd be careful of overestimating numbers. ONS has run into some trouble trying to work out how many people have actually left, and there was a lot of discussion about 700,000, 800,000, 1.2 million. Actually, when you dig into the numbers, it's probably quite a lot less than that at this stage. So the way I'd think about the effects of Brexit is less about people going home, although some of that has happened, and more about people not coming. So we've been used for the last 10, 15, 20 years for net migration to be running at 200, 300,000. I think that we will continue to have six-figure net migration. The challenge, the makeup of it will change. It'll be rather more from the Commonwealth and from other states globally, and rather less from Europe. But the critical thing, of course, is that people coming in will have to be at the qualification level 3, RQF level 3, to come in. So thinking again about inflow into career paths in the industry, that early stage career path has been cut off for the moment. I do think that we'll have a more pragmatic discussion about it over time, though, because of course in 3, 4, 5 months time, immigration policy will just be immigration policy again. It will no longer be immigration policy brought to you in association with the trenches of the Brexit war.
You're an optimist, as they say. You think that war's over. Richard, is that what you're seeing?
We're seeing, we work typically a lot down the what I call the mucky end of the market. Around 80% of our work is in blue collar tradespeople and the people that support them, and we're seeing an acute shortage still of blue collar tradespeople. So your plumbers, carpenters, fitters, electricians, fabric maintenance, we're seeing an acute shortage. That hasn't changed, and that's been the case for certainly for the 20 years I've been in recruitment. There's been a continual skill shortage, which is going to be exacerbated because there will be a reduction, as Neil said, in the free movement of EU citizens into the UK. which hasn't been replaced by elsewhere. They don't really have a structure, I don't think quite yet, a plan of where they're going to get all the next lot from, if you know what I mean. So yes,
Sure.
I agree.
Thank you. Helen, you come from the FIS. It was a good time ago now, but representing dry liners, and in some parts of London, 90% of the staff were migrant workforce. Have you seen that still?
Well, certainly with I think with the dry liners, I think they've got a massive issue. I know they have. When I talk to my old colleagues, they've got a real problem. It's a massive issue from their perspective. Not so much in our industry, but certainly in theirs.
But as we've been saying, if you don't put walls up, you don't necessarily get services completed. So it has a knock-on, an indirect effect. First question from the floor for Neil. Is there an industry standard on staff retention that we could use as a benchmark?
I think retention varies heavily from sector to sector. So I would always tend to, I mean, I don't know what you have, David, at BESA. I would tend to use sectoral surveys to measure retention. Certainly, our experience would be that that retention varies very widely between sectors. All of our members would report that. So perhaps the place to go for that is any sectoral survey, sectoral employment surveys that you have.
Yeah. Helen, where do you think that would lie?
In terms of what the percentage?
Well, yes, the percentage, but is there a benchmark that people could use?
No, I don't think there is at the moment. I think that's something that that we could certainly look at developing. I think as BESA, I think that will be an interesting statistic to look into.
Just to pitch in on that, I think actually the question starts with the right principle, which is one way to, of course, to make sure you've got your workforce planning right is to keep the people that you've got. And I do think that as we come out of the pandemic, retention is going to be a challenge because you've got this very lively labour market, so people will be being approached, will be seeing opportunities. So, you know, making sure that workforce planning that both Helen and I have talked about encompasses retention strategies is going to be absolutely vital.
I've just come from a meeting this morning on the BESA BIM group, Digital Construction Group, and we jokingly say that the BIM transfer window is open because when one person moves, that triggers a whole room of other moves across the piece where they take a feed, and you see, so they have a good change around. The window closes, then they move on again. I suspect we could see a good deal more of that. A couple of weeks ago, we did something on insurance and the rise in premiums on insurance and restrictions in cover. The reason I bring that up is that they both mentioned it's important that you have a good brand because actually you're selling yourself to the insurers to say you're a good risk. And from what I took from what both Richard and you said, Neil, was that it's really important that you project a company that people want to work for. What should companies do about that?
Well, the most people that register with us, and we register 50,000 people in the last 6 months of last year. So we've got a relatively good demographic. By far, most come through recommendation and referral. So my advice to people is build your career site. So build a career site. Use the BESA job board. I'm going to say that, but spend some time. If you're a hiring manager, build a career site. Build a presence on LinkedIn solely around careers and advancement and vacancies, even if it's a subdomain to your main site. And then you can get a good recruitment marketing company to promote that. To Google for jobs, etc. But above all, get your own people to promote your business. It's by far more powerful than any other spend you'll make on recruitment. So start there, my advice.
And Neil?
Couldn't agree more with that. Couldn't agree more with that from Richard. The most important thing is have an idea of what type of employer you want to be, make some decisions about where you want to be in the market. Make sure that the employer brand that you develop using the kind of tools like a career site that Richard suggested, make sure that that passes the smell test. And that does mean having to read the really uncomfortable stuff on Glassdoor and places like that where people are writing reviews about your company. and making sure, so you're not going to become #1 on the Sunday Times Best Companies to Work For index in one fell swoop. Be clear about where you are, what you want to achieve, what your offer is. Make sure that you are making that site and that messaging accessible broadly. I think, you know, referral is really important, but I do think that in lots of industries, and I think BESA sits in a group of sectors where this is absolutely the case. There are communities that need to be reached to solve this problem for businesses, and those communities are not going to be reached in the ways that businesses have traditionally hired. So think about how you get that messaging into different places as well. That's why we talk a lot about recruitment marketing now as a skill set. If I think about the things that my members are hiring, they're hiring people to advise clients on recruitment marketing, and they're hiring people to advise clients on digitization of the hiring process.
And it's about more than salary then as well, presumably.
Yeah, I think the critical thing is that salary is always going to be a determinant. I think you have to be clear about where you sit in the offer. And people will trade salary off for different things if you then deliver them. People will take a slightly lower salary for the right development plan, but you then have to make sure you deliver the right development plan. So I think it's about thinking about the whole package, and I think particularly for younger generation workers, and I'm not a great fan of this generation are so much more demanding. I think all employees have always thought this stuff. It's just that younger generation workers, we've got far enough down the end of deference that they'll tell you up front what they want. I think you have to have a discussion with people about, you know, what makes them want to work for you, and that might be different from person to person.
Helen, you were nodding vigorously during that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would add that that's very, very true when we're looking at apprentices coming in. You know, I think when they're looking at decisions as to what company and where they want to work and what career choice they're going to make, the money is not a primary importance to them. They are very much thinking about what difference can I make to my world. That's what's turning them on now. Money is a good thing, yes, obviously, as Neil says, it will be one of the factors, but they're thinking more about what does my life look like and what difference am I going to make.
David, you'll have thought about this for BESA. Certainly I think about it for the REC, which is how do you articulate the purpose of what we're trying to achieve? So the REC is trying to make great work happen across the entire British labour market. And that's because that's what our members do. They put people in the right places and they help companies to grow. And I think employees, particularly early career workers, are looking for you to answer that question. What does this business enable? What's the difference that we're making? And I think being able to articulate that pithily is quite important to recruitment marketing.
I think that's a very, very valid point. What are we about? Why are we here? What would happen if we weren't here? Well, would you invent it? One from Richard. Over time, we've seen that recruitment agencies have been responsible for driving up salaries to unreasonable levels. How can we as an individual company combat this?
Well, I've personally placed thousands of people personally over the years, and I don't think I've ever personally got into a gazumping battle over a placement over salary. The market drives the salary. So, and if I'll give you figuratively, if the market rate for an air conditioning engineer is 40k, why would you advertise the job at 35k? If everybody in the market, and don't forget, use something like Indeed or Google for Jobs to tell you that's the market. We're not going to be able to get you a half pint into a half pint pot. So we don't, and I don't know, and I've worked with hundreds of colleagues, and I'm on a network similar to, and I'm on the REC, and I'm on other networks, and I don't personally hear that we are doing what sometimes estate agents get accused of whipping up the market, because the data is everywhere, it's ubiquitous. So I'm going to respectfully reject that claim that we are arbiters of some kind of secret society, that the more money you get, the more fees we get. And quite a lot of my fees are fixed fees anyway with my clients, and salary independent. So it's the market. It's like buying your house. You're not going to buy a house in Wimbledon for 50 grand, are you? So
I would just point out, Richard, however, that the poster behind you, the guy has a mask on. So Neil, would you like to
So I'll join Richard in this battle. I think it's easy to point fingers at intermediaries. My view would be that if that was true, margins in recruitment would be a lot fatter than they are, and certainly I do think there is a challenge in the model, because a lot of recruitment is done working with agencies on a contingency basis. So where you're throwing the job out to a few agencies, and the one who gets the placement gets the fee, and agencies are turning fees on maybe one job in 10 they work on. I think increasingly our members are turning their back on that kind of work. What they want to do is to be able to have a conversation with you, very much like the one Richard's just placed, which is, you're not going to get that. You could get that or that. Which do you want us to go for? And then get into that space and perhaps to work a bit more exclusively, with the aim of getting you someone that sticks for a while, that answers your retention point. So I think some of this is about which recruitment firms you work for. You work with, I would suggest. And it's one of the reasons why we think the market will progressively move, especially for skilled jobs, towards a more advisory professional services style format. When you go to court as a business, you take a qualified solicitor. You might get a barrister for some cases. It's important. If your people matter to you, you use recruiters in a bit more of a professional services way. I think if you're getting a lot of people, if you're getting recruiters fighting like goldfish for the fish food, that might be about how you're framing the offer to them. So that's why I mentioned the Good Recruitment Collective earlier, because it's got lots of advice about how to get the best out of recruiters. But I don't see ramping salaries is something that most recruiters, all recruiters try to avoid, because of course the market is so competitive that it's likely a short way to not getting a second bit of business.
Sure. So a dilemma, I think, for many employers is that your recruitment agency says, well, the salary bracket for this is 45k, say, or your current staff are on 40. And so you just want to put competitive salary up on your post. Is that what you should do, Richard, or should you not do that?
Well, we were talking about this morning. I think it really adversely affects the quality of response you get. When I do poll people, a lot of people will not bother applying to an advert with no salary, because a lot of people think it's just a phishing vacancy, it's not specific. Now, I would agree to maybe put a range and the median range of what you're paying, but I would strongly advise against blanking. It seems a bit 1980s to me. What have we all got to hide? What is the problem here? So I don't get it. I do understand that but if you've got people that you're paying under the market rate in your business, are you desperately trying to keep it that way and then keep a load of unhappy people? I don't get the direction of this. I think there should be a lot more openness. And the algorithms that scrape these websites, promote these jobs, they're desperate for data. They want to promote your job. So Google for Jobs will promote your job if it's got good quality information in all the fields. So don't forget that. And Google is the all-seeing eye here. And so your jobs won't get promoted and out there unless you've got good quality information within the job's description. And you can be a bit funny and creative with that. I see so many really boring job ads, but there's nothing wrong with being a bit creative and funny and getting a bit of copywriter on it, and put the salary in, or the guide salary and benefits, promote this stuff. So I don't like it. I don't like blank salaries at all.
Right. Neil?
I think you should always be upfront. I think there are a couple of reasons why, further reasons. I agree with everything Richard said, why you would do it. One is actually, if you need to hire at 45 and all your current staff are on 40, over time, it is likely you're embedding some inequalities there. So if you think about gender and ethnic minority pay gap reporting, which larger firms will have to do at some stage in the next few years, it's worth bearing in mind, right back to that first question about retention. Your recruitment strategy and your retention strategy should go hand in hand. If you've decided that you're paying 40, that's fine. Go to the market at 40 and sell the rest of the job. You go to Helen's point about, well, what else are we doing that means 40 is acceptable here, is attractive here rather than 45? But equally, make sure you can, if you have to go at 45, demonstrate that you've benchmarked your salaries, because you can do that. And I think it's quite important to retention strategy as well. You know, pay is always a hygiene factor in all of this, but you have to demonstrate that you're living the people strategy you've set for where you want to pitch yourself, whether that's top quartile, halfway, third quartile. All of those are reasonable decisions to make, but actively make that decision on how you pay and how you structure.
Okay. Beginning of April, we had a change to IR35, which was believed to have quite a significant impact on the sector. What are you seeing there? Richard, you were nodding at the beginning. So.
I've done a lot of this, and I mean, I'll give you an example, and I'll keep the client confidential. Last week, we onboarded 20 private investigators off payroll to on payroll. So this is a really big deal, but what most people are doing, or the employers are doing, some kind of deal to keep the talent they've got in place. So that if that's a small uplift in the cost for NICs or pension or the agency apprentice level, most of my clients are swallowing that cost on doing a deal to move these contractors into an employment regime, by far.
Okay, and Neil?
Yeah, I recognise that picture. I think it's probably benefited a bit from the kind of downbeat labour market the last 12 months and a couple of delays. So our experience of REC members calling in over the last few weeks has been that they're asking complex questions of detail, which means that they're across the core of it. I think the critical thing is making sure you, as clients, you've done your status determinations, because your staffing firms shouldn't be helping you with that, with those. And then just being super resistant to any kind of silver bullet like pitches of one size fits all solutions, because they don't exist. You know, in some places a statement of work might work, but most of the time it doesn't. I'm very guarded about how umbrellas are used as well. I think that's really important. There's we've been pushing for years for some proper regulation of these payroll umbrellas that contractors can use to come into PAYE. I think that's coming, and I think government sees the case for it, particularly avoiding anything that looks like one of the mini umbrella ideas. If people want to know more about that, there's lots on the REC website that you can look into. But yeah, just make sure you get your status determination right and actively make the decision about how you bring people on payroll. And because I do think that is the trend for most of the places I see, and Richard seems to be seeing the same.
Helen, for direct employment is something that's increasingly trending in our members, is it not?
Yeah, and it's something that obviously, certainly from a new entrant perspective, it's a trend that we'd like to see more of, because the only way you're going to get more apprentices on board is through direct employment. So and that's the way to upskill and reskill people, is not to have them at arm's length.
One of the things that you mentioned, Neil, was about reskilling people from areas where the jobs are not required anymore, and the government caught a bit of a cold with the ballerina reclassification. I forgot what she went into. Cybersecurity, wasn't it?
Yeah,
but there are, I mean, we're involved in a sort of a bit of that upskilling people to do heat pumps, because there are going to be hundreds of thousands of heat pumps installed in the future. Do you see large-scale government-backed programs to do that? You could whole industries which are fading, new ones coming on.
I think like everything else, it's a mixed economy. So in the private sector, I'm definitely seeing a big trend amongst REC members to go down a route of employ, train, deploy, as in bringing people in, training them up, and then deploying them to clients to do some in-demand services. It's been coming in IT for a long time. You know, IT basically didn't have a downturn over the last year in terms of hiring, and I think it's starting to spread out to different places, members doing it, things like smart meter installation and so forth at the moment. Government side is difficult because government remains committed to one form of qualification, and that's the apprenticeship funded via the apprenticeship levy. I think there's a really difficult conversation coming, which is apprenticeships are hugely vital. We have to get them right, but they're not the only form of qualification that has value. So we have to address the fact that anything the government does, my view would be, has to reform the levy system that employers face to enable both the continued, well, a resumption of the growth of the apprenticeship system, in fact, because it's fallen away over the last few years in many sectors, and some of this retraining. I think anything else will likely be subscale for the challenge that we face. Government's put some pots of money behind this, but they're small beer by comparison with the scale of the levy pot. I think the big discussion with government over the next couple of years is going to be how can the levy more effectively become a skills policy rather than a tax that funds a skills system, which is where we are today.
Well, that funnels cash, basically, rather than skills particularly. Helen?
Yeah, I was going to say, interestingly, I've had our apprenticeship board this morning, and we asked, you know, what does it look like? How many people are actually using the investments, the additional investment incentives that have been put out there by government for taking on more apprentices this year? And the answer is none. Every single member that was on there had already set a strategy, already had their whole approach to apprentices over the next 12 months aligned and sorted. The extra money that's being thrown in is as Neil said, it's small beer, it's nothing. It doesn't mean anything to them, and it doesn't address the issues that they've got. They're not interested. However, they all have large levy pots sitting there, not being able to use them. And it's absolutely the right thing for us to start to continue. And we've been asking for this actually for the last few years, but we do really need to push more on how can we use this to actually reskill and upskill people, because it's not all about apprenticeships.
I think, Neil, one of the difficulties we have is that we are unapologetically technically difficult. And you mentioned at the beginning, I think, about you'd take a qualified lawyer to court with you, or a barrister. You wouldn't take somebody who's done a 6-day course on one specific aspect and go into court and expect them to defend you, or would you? But that's pretty much where the policy is. We'll detach all this skill that you need as a pipe fitter, say, or an electrician. We'll give you a short course and say off you go, because you can do that. Because it's about more than doing that simple operation, and that's the complexity. I'm afraid we're out of time. I was going to ask you one final question, if I may. Slightly light-hearted. What do you recommend your children do? You've got a son or a daughter. What industry would you say go for that? I'll ask Helen first, because she's one of us, so I'm only hitting her. Helen, take your time to think.
Well, I would turn it around and say that I've actually got 4 children, and there's a gap between the first 2 and the second 2. The first 2 went to university and the second 2 didn't. And that's mainly because the first 2 said, no, you don't need to go to university. Make sure you do something else. And of the second 2, one went to an FE college, and the second one went straight into work and is educating himself while he's actually at work. And both of them in all 4 of them in very different industries. So and of those that did, 2 that did their university have not ended up doing what they went to uni.
And Richard?
Well, I've got a long list because I've got 5 children, and the top 2 I've already left school and are doing trades, a trades apprenticeship, you'll be pleased to know. the middle two girls, one wants to be a police officer and one wants to be an interior designer, and my little 4-year-old wants to be a racing driver, but I'll let him off that one. But my advice is like what my dad said to me, get a trade behind you, and then the rest, you know, the world's your lobster. So do some kind of trade qualification and bank that, and then take it on from there. Yeah.
And Neil?
So I've got two. One's 10, one's just about to be 14. I'll defend myself by starting by saying that when I used to do schools policy in my CBI days, I used to say the problem with parental careers advice is always 30 years out of date. So whatever I advise is probably wrong. But I do think we need to. My advice to my kids is you don't have to solve it all by the time you're 18 or 21. So, and I think I've thought a lot about this because one of my kids is on the autistic spectrum, so he's got Asperger's. We're going to take a little while to learn to learn how you deal with people, and it sort of opened my eyes to the fact that we can just walk them on an easier path. So I suspect my advice to parents is walk by the side of your kids as they explore a world that's very different to the one you want to explore, with the exception of my son, who still wants to play at 6 for Scotland for the Scotland national rugby team, because while he was born in Oxford, he made the right choice.
That should be fairly easy to accommodate, shouldn't it? The standard, the Scottish team.
I'll just burnish a Calcutta Cup there.
Yeah, indeed, I wasn't going to make any other comment. Neil, Richard, Helen, thank you very much indeed. I'm sorry we've run out of time, but that was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So coming up, we've got a whole load of stuff coming up on Tuesday the 20th, raising the alarm about damper testing, fire damper testing. If you have an interest in that, make sure you tune in. I'm not going to be here, but I think our good friend Graham Fox is going to chair that one. And on that note, I hope you have a very good afternoon. Thank you for coming, and see you again soon.